My life was measured in cheap heels, desperate prayers, and the lingering scent of my 4-year-old strawberry shampoo. I was a waitress, running on fumes, fighting to be invisible. But invisibility died the moment my ex-husband, Marcus, walked back into my restaurant. My panic was a wildfire, and I had only one choice: find the biggest monster in the room. I lunged across the bar and seized the hand of Darian Thorne. The city whispers his name like a warning, a predator who owns the night. His skin felt like warm marble beneath my desperate touch. He didn't save me, he claimed me. That single forbidden touch pulled me from the frying pan of my past and threw me into a war for his empire. I found refuge in his shadow, but soon I would learn the terrifying difference between a protector and a cage. The sight of Marcus, my abusive ex-husband, across the restaurant froze the blood in my veins. He looked entirely too successful for a man who'd left me broken and desperate. And I knew his presence here meant one thing: the game of control was back on. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate, frantic drumbeat against the clock, as I realized I had nowhere to hide. Marcus was already starting to scan the room, his eyes sharp and seeking me out, threatening my carefully constructed solitude. My gaze snapped to the corner bar, landing on the man sitting alone, cloaked in an aura of severe, untouchable power. This was Darian Thorne. He was the kind of man whose presence felt like a physical weight, chiseled and dangerous, accustomed to taking whatever he wanted. His suit was flawless, his expression remote, yet intense. I knew the risk was catastrophic, but I weighed it against Marcus's familiar cruelty. I needed a bigger, colder monster to drive the first one away. Every rational voice screamed that I was insane, but instinct, the raw need to survive for Chloe, overruled sanity. Marcus was moving toward the hostess stand. I lunged across the velvet rope that separated the bar, crossing the boundary that defined my modest world from his lethal one. I didn't just touch him. I clamped down on the back of his hand, a desperate, burning lifeline of raw contact. His skin was warm and firm beneath mine, a shocking, all-consuming contrast to the icy terror gripping my soul. He didn't flinch, didn't even look down, yet the atmosphere around us grew immediately heavy and charged. Slowly, those dark, knowing eyes lifted with an intensity that felt like a physical invasion. "Yes?" he asked, his voice a low, smooth rumble, a challenging question in his distinct accent. I risked one terrified glance back. Marcus had spotted me, and the rage in his face was already set. I knew I had seconds before he reached my table. Please," I pleaded, leaning in close so only he could hear the desperate urgency in my voice. "You have to know me. I'm Elara. Say you know me, or he'll ruin everything." I was begging a predator to pretend I belonged to him, offering my utter silent submission in that frozen moment. A slow, chilling understanding dawned in his eyes, not of pity, but of the immense price of the transaction I was proposing. He realized he had just acquired a new, terrified piece on his chessboard. Then, a cold, almost predatory smile stretched his perfect mouth. He slowly lifted my hand from his, turning it over to hold mine firmly, possessively. His touch was suddenly a brand. "Of course, Elara, you are late." The words sealed my fate, dismissing me as a mere delay, but the frightening consequence of the dangerous exchange I just made was yet to be fully revealed. Darian Thorne didn't release my hand. Instead, his fingers tightened, a silent, powerful claim that felt less like rescue and more like being branded. I was acutely aware of the searing warmth where our skin met, a dangerous heat that momentarily overpowered the cold dread Marcus inspired. His gaze never left mine, demanding silent gratitude and, more importantly, immediate obedience. I could feel the eyes of every power player in the restaurant on us, wondering who this desperate woman was. The transformation in Marcus's face was brutal and quick. shifting from triumphant rage to utter, immediate horror. He took one step closer, ready to confront me, but his eyes swept up to Darian's face, and he froze mid-stride. Marcus knew exactly who Darian Thorne was. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and instantly defeated. Darian's reputation was not just whispered. It was a physical force that suffocated anyone who challenged it, even indirectly. Darian finally acknowledged the pathetic threat standing 10 feet away, but he did so without moving his head, only allowing his chilling eyes to drift over Marcus. "You seem to be mistaken, friend." Darian's voice cut through the noise of the dining room, low enough to be intimate, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "This woman is with me, and she is late. Perhaps you should find another table, or better yet, another venue." The dismissal was absolute, surgical in its arrogance. Marcus didn't utter a single word of protest, which was its own terrifying answer. The man who had broken my spirit and my wrist now looked like a frightened boy caught stealing. He backed away slowly, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap, his anger dissolving into genuine, visceral fear. He turned on his heel and rushed toward the front doors, disappearing into the autumn night without a backward glance. My first monster was gone, but my savior still held me captive. Darian finally released my hand, but the absence of his touch felt like a violation, the sudden loss of a potent shield. "You owe me, Elara," he stated, the use of the false name, a deliberate reminder of the pact. He gestured to the empty seat beside him at the bar, his eyes now calculating and assessing, devoid of the mild amusement he'd shown moments before. "Tell me your real name and exactly what just transpired. I don't appreciate being used as bait." The gravity of the situation hit me. I was alone with a man who could easily destroy me, but who had chosen, for now, not to. I straightened my waitress uniform, trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. The room was silent now. All eyes were still on us, waiting for the performance to end. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear still on my tongue, knowing I had to choose my next words with lethal precision. But the real cost of his protection was about to be presented. I took the seat Darian Thorne indicated, placing my tired body next to his immense, unsettling presence. The first thing he did was reach for a napkin, and with a heavy, gold-plated pen, he wrote a single word: Elara. I hadn't even uttered my real name, yet he'd already known it. My breath hitched. Marco, the floor manager, must have whispered it to him, a pathetic act of loyalty to the most powerful man in the room. I felt shame wash over me, realizing how easily my identity had been bought and sold. "Elara," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue, his tone cool and analytical. "Tell me about Marcus. Who is he, and why did he look at me like I was a firing squad?" I kept my answers simple, direct, unwilling to expose the raw wounds of my past any more than necessary. "He's my ex-husband. He's abusive and dangerous. He's been stalking me since the divorce." My voice was steady, a deliberate choice to hide the lingering tremor in my hands. He watched me with an unnerving lack of emotion, as if my trauma were a complicated business report he was reviewing. He signaled his intent with a subtle lift of his chin, and an aide, a man with cold eyes, who I would later know as Silas, placed a small antique leather envelope on the bar top. The efficiency was frightening. Darian's control extended into the smallest details of the restaurant. I knew I couldn't escape the conversation, not after the debt I had just incurred. He pushed the envelope towards me without fanfare. "This is for your trouble tonight, for the ruined evening and for the fear I saw in your eyes." I hesitated, recognizing the unmistakable density of cash inside. It was a cold, transactional gesture, completely devoid of sentiment, yet undeniably tempting. My instinct was to reject the payoff immediately, to declare that my integrity wasn't for sale, but I paused. I thought of Chloe, my daughter. "I can't take this," I managed to say, though the lie felt thin and desperate. Darian simply leaned back, his expression darkening slightly. "Don't insult me, Elara. It's already yours. Consider it compensation for the discomfort you just endured." His dark eyes were challenging, daring me to refuse his authority, daring me to cling to my pride over the survival of my child. His use of my true name felt possessive, and I knew arguing further would only anger the wrong kind of man. I picked up the envelope, my fingers shaking, the leather cool and smooth against my skin. I suddenly understood. The money wasn't a gift. It was a non-negotiable transfer of ownership, and the cold calculation in his eyes confirmed the repayment would be something far more costly than cash.
Darian stood, his movement fluid and controlled, forcing me to rise instantly to match his speed. "Your shift is finished, Elara," he stated, his voice a low command, not a question. It would be impolite for me to leave my date here to serve overpriced risotto. I wanted to protest, to explain the necessity of finishing my hours, but the fierce authority radiating from him silenced the argument on my tongue. He had already decided my destiny for the evening. He placed a hand lightly, yet possessively, on the small of my back, guiding me away from the bar. The simple touch felt like a current, shocking and undeniable, burning through the thin fabric of my uniform. It was an announcement to everyone watching, the diners, the staff, and the unseen forces in the city, that I was his possession now. My posture straightened involuntarily under the weight of his claim, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. As we walked toward the exit, I felt a tremor of fear, anticipating Marco's confrontation. But Marco, the manager who constantly scolded me, didn't even meet my eye. He was stationed by the host stand, his face pale and deferential, giving Darian a low, almost terrified nod of recognition as we passed. The respect Darian commanded was staggering, painting a clearer picture of the danger I had attached myself to. Outside, the cool night air was a relief, but the street was anything but calm. A sleek black SUV, the kind you only see in spy movies, was idling at the curb. Standing beside it was the cold-eyed man from the bar, Silas, Darian's aide. Silas moved like a shadow, his eyes constantly scanning the street, confirming Darian's world operated under a constant state of high alert and hidden threat. Darian opened the passenger door for me with a practiced, intimate gesture. "We are going for a drive," he informed me, his eyes dark with unreadable intent. "I need to know everything about Marcus, your daughter Chloe, and the terms of your past relationship." The sudden mention of my daughter, his ability to already know her name, was the first true chill that pierced through the fear of him. He slid into the driver's seat, and Silas took the spot behind him, the formation feeling less like a chauffeured ride and more like a tactical maneuver. As we pulled away from the curb, I realized Darian hadn't asked me if I wanted to go. He had simply commanded it, and I had no idea that this impromptu drive would take me directly toward a truth about my ex-husband that would shatter my entire understanding of my past. The sleek SUV moved through the city streets with silent, terrifying speed, and I finally found my voice, laced with fear. "How do you know Chloe's name? I never mentioned her to anyone at the restaurant." Darian didn't immediately answer, instead pulling out a secure phone that looked impossibly thin. He spoke a few swift words in a language I didn't understand, likely Italian, before giving me his chilling answer. "I know everything I need to know, Elara. I knew your apartment address and your schedule before I finished my scotch." He glanced at me. His eyes momentarily softened, which was somehow more unnerving than his coldness. "Your ex-husband, Marcus, isn't just a desperate drunk who wants custody. He has debts, severe ones, to people who are far less patient than I am. The divorce papers, they weren't about freedom. They were about escaping his own financial ruin and forcing you to bear his shame." The scale of his knowledge terrified me, confirming his reach was absolute. "And now he's trying to use you and Chloe as collateral to pay them off," Darian finished, the revelation hitting me like a physical blow. The shame I felt over Marcus's abuse was immediately replaced by the burning realization that my struggle hadn't been about love or hate. It was just a cheap, complicated business arrangement that Marcus was desperate to exploit. Darian finally pulled the vehicle into a dark, secluded underground garage that screamed security and secrecy. He turned his body toward me, the movement demanding my full attention. I don't offer favors, Elara. Everything is a transaction. I removed your ex-husband from your life tonight, permanently. Now you owe me something more than silence. The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch in my throat. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous murmur that promised both salvation and sin. I need an accessory for the next 3 months. A woman who looks good, asks no questions, and, most importantly, appears to be mine. Your life will be safe, secure, and financially effortless, but you must commit fully to the illusion. The proposal was outrageous, a blatant barter for my time, my body, and my freedom. My head spun with the sheer audacity of his demand, yet the promise of Chloe's safety was a siren song I couldn't ignore. 3 months of protection, 3 months of peace, and a clean financial slate. And what happens after 3 months, Darian? I asked, challenging his control for the first time. His predatory smile widened, a clear sign that his final and most crucial demand was still coming. I pushed back against the smooth leather seat, shaking my head vehemently, the sheer audacity of his proposal stunning me into defiance. I can't do that, Darian, I insisted, the refusal ringing hollow even to my own ears. I am not an accessory. I'm a mother, and I don't barter my life for a clean slate, especially not with someone who moves in the shadows. My pride, the only thing Marcus hadn't managed to steal, was suddenly fighting for survival. Darian didn't raise his voice, but his stillness was more intimidating than any shout. Pride is a luxury you cannot afford, Elara, he corrected, his voice a low, chilling reprimand. You think you have choices. Your ex-husband saw me and fled, but he will be back. And the people he owes money to will find you next, thinking Chloe is your weakness. They don't play dress-up. They break things. His words were cold, irrefutable logic aimed straight at my core fear. He reached into his jacket pocket and didn't produce a gun, but a sealed manila envelope. I already took the liberty of paying your overdue bills, including the rent for your apartment for the next 6 months. He placed the envelope on the console between us. But Marcus has already breached the custody agreement, and you need a lawyer who isn't intimidated by powerful people, a luxury I can easily provide. The financial freedom was a beautiful, terrible weight. I felt the fragile wall of my independence crumbling. It wasn't the money that tempted me, but the promise of legal defense and, more importantly, the guarantee of safety for my daughter. I looked down at the envelope, seeing not just cash, but the secure future of Chloe. He hadn't just offered me protection. He had dismantled every single one of my defenses and counter-arguments with chilling efficiency. And what guarantees do I have that you won't be another kind of jailer? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, conceding the point, but still grasping for control. Darian smiled again, and this time it held a spark of something almost genuine, a touch of dark amusement. You have my word, Elara, and unlike your ex-husband, I always keep my promises. Besides, he added, his eyes narrowing slightly, you have a unique advantage. You are the only person in this city who doesn't fear me enough to tell me no." He reached out and placed his warm, firm hand over mine, the possessive contact closing the deal. "And you will soon find out that my protection, once given, cannot be revoked, even if you try to walk away." Darian tapped the steering wheel, his expression thoughtful, signaling to Silas that the negotiations were finalized. "We need to collect Chloe and your essentials. You will not be returning to your apartment for the duration of our arrangement." The finality of his tone left no room for appeal. My previous life was already being dismantled. The sudden, forced acceleration of my displacement was frightening, yet the thought of returning to that tiny apartment, exposed to Marcus, was far worse. Darian made a call, outlining logistics in sharp, clipped sentences. Silas, seated behind him, leaned slightly forward. His pale eyes, previously disinterested, met mine in the rearview mirror, a chilling, silent assessment. "My job is to ensure Mr. Thorne's security," Silas stated, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "If your presence compromises that, even inadvertently, the arrangement ends permanently. You must follow every instruction without question." The implicit threat was crystal clear. Silas was the practical embodiment of the danger surrounding Darian. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a silent reminder of the lethal consequences of stepping out of line. I nodded, confirming my understanding, feeling the weight of the new world's rules settling heavily onto my shoulders. This wasn't protection. It was a voluntary confinement, and I was only safe inside Darian's sightline. Darian tapped the steering wheel, his expression thoughtful, signaling to Silas that the negotiations were finalized. "We need to collect Chloe and your essentials. You will not be returning to your apartment for the duration of our arrangement." The finality of his tone left no room for appeal. My previous life was already being dismantled. The sudden, forced acceleration of my displacement was frightening, yet the thought of returning to that tiny apartment, exposed to Marcus, was far worse. As Darian made a call, outlining logistics in sharp, clipped sentences, Silas, seated behind him, leaned slightly forward. His pale eyes, previously disinterested, met mine in the rearview mirror, a chilling, silent assessment. "My job is to ensure Mr. Thorne's security," Silas stated, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "If your presence compromises that, even inadvertently, the arrangement ends permanently. You must follow every instruction without question." The implicit threat was clear. Silas was the practical embodiment of the danger surrounding Darian. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a silent reminder of the lethal consequences of stepping out of line. I nodded, confirming my understanding, feeling the weight of the new world's rules settling heavily onto my shoulders. This wasn't protection. It was a voluntary confinement, and I was only safe inside Darian's sightline. Darian ended his call and pulled the SUV out of the underground garage, merging smoothly onto the dimly lit highway. He noticed the exchange between Silas and me. "Do not worry about Silas. He is loyal, efficient, and utterly heartless," he said, a statement that was both a reassurance and a warning. "He protects my legitimate interests just as fiercely as he protects the others." "What are your legitimate interests?" I asked him, challenging him gently, trying to gauge the true scale of his empire. Darian allowed a small, prideful smirk to curve his lips. "Hotels, vineyards, international finance. The things that make the money look clean and keep the government happy." He briefly looked at me. Real power isn't about being seen in the papers, Elara. It's about owning the shadows they try to hide.
We arrived at my cramped apartment building 30 minutes later, the imposing black SUV looking entirely out of place on the quiet street. The tension in my chest was unbearable. I had to wake my 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, and explain this sudden, terrifying flight. Darian stopped me before I could open the door. Silas and 2 men will enter first. You will pack essentials only. No questions, no sentimental hesitation. 10 minutes. I can't just snatch my daughter away without explanation, I protested, my protective maternal instinct finally overriding my fear of him. She needs me to reassure her. She needs a story, Darian. I looked at him fiercely, daring him to challenge my role as her mother. His expression didn't soften, but he paused, a slight flicker of something unreadable crossing his eyes. Then give her the story, Elara, he conceded, the compromise a tiny crack in his armor. Tell her it's an adventure, a last-minute trip to a safe place. But be quick. We are exposing our position right now, and that luxury is finite. He gave the final command to Silas, who moved with practiced surgical precision into the dark building, followed by 2 other large men. The scene was less a trip and more an extraction. I raced up the stairs to my apartment, finding Silas already inside, efficiently gathering documents. I went straight to Chloe's room. Her small form was peaceful in the dim light. I smoothed her strawberry-scented hair, whispering the word adventure, feeling a crushing wave of guilt. I quickly packed her favorite worn blanket and a few essential toys, trying to suppress the urge to cry. Downstairs, I emerged with a sleepy, confused Chloe nestled securely in my arms. Darian was waiting beside the SUV. As I approached, he extended his arm, taking Chloe gently from me. I held my breath, expecting roughness, but his movements were surprisingly tender, practiced even. He settled her into the back seat, securing her without flaw, his touch infinitely gentle. Seeing the man who wielded absolute power handle my fragile daughter with such care was jarring. It didn't fit the narrative of the ruthless criminal I had constructed. As he shut the door, Darian met my gaze, a strange vulnerability exposed for a fleeting second. I know what it means to lose everything, he stated simply, his voice low, before he led me back to the front of the car. But I had yet to learn just how close to his own heart his statement truly was. Darian pulled the SUV back onto the highway, driving away from the tiny apartment that had been my only refuge. Chloe was already drifting back to sleep in the seat behind us. The sudden quiet in the car felt heavy, charged with the unsaid exchange we had just shared. I risked a glance at Darian, searching for the crack I'd seen when he spoke of loss. But his profile was once again carved from stone, intimidating and remote. "What did you mean you know what it means to lose everything?" I asked, pushing the boundary between protector and predator, needing to understand the man who now commanded my life. The question was risky, but the gentle way he'd handled my daughter had given me a fleeting, dangerous courage. I knew the answer would be important, a key to the complex world I had just entered. Darian didn't look at me, but his knuckles tightened on the steering wheel, betraying a flicker of internal strife. "Everyone assumes I was born into this, Elara, that power was handed to me on a silver platter. They're wrong." His voice was low, carrying a rare, profound bitterness that hinted at deep-seated wounds. I watched my father's legitimate business be systematically destroyed by men who lacked honor. I was a kid when he died, not of old age, but of broken pride, crushed by debts he couldn't fight. He finally met my gaze, his eyes flashing with a raw, fierce intensity I hadn't seen before. I learned early on that the world only respects power that is taken, never power that is given. That's the lesson that built everything you see now. His confession was the first humanizing piece of the puzzle, a motive for his cold ambition that made him less of a monster and more of a deeply scarred survivor. The tragedy of his past connected directly to my own fight against Marcus. Both of us were struggling to survive the shame and debt left by others. He was a dark reflection of my own survival instinct. He reached over and placed his hand on my thigh, a deliberate, possessive, and comforting gesture that instantly elevated the tension between us. Don't confuse my ambition for greed, Elara. Everything I built was meant to ensure that no one I care about ever again has to face that kind of shame. And in that moment, I realized the war he was fighting wasn't just for power, but for a twisted form of family honor.
The SUV finally pulled off the highway and up a long, winding private road, leaving the glow of the city far behind. We stopped before a vast, modern estate nestled into the hillside, completely isolated and protected by high walls and sophisticated security cameras. The house was not ostentatious like the homes of the newly rich. It was designed with a cold, minimalist elegance that spoke of old money and absolute secrecy. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Silas and the other security men positioned themselves silently around the perimeter the moment the car stopped. Darian led me inside, where the warmth and sheer scale of the house immediately overwhelmed my senses. The floors were polished marble, the furniture was bespoke, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the dark, sprawling landscape below. It was a world away from my cramped, struggling reality. He led me upstairs to a suite that was larger than my entire apartment, with a massive bed and a bathroom that resembled a spa. "This is where you and Chloe will stay," Darian announced, his voice neutral. "It is secure and no one outside of my most trusted inner circle knows this location. Consider it your safety deposit box for the next 3 months. His tone was professional, erasing the flicker of intimacy we had shared in the car. "There is one key rule here, Elara," Darian continued, leaning against the doorframe, his body radiating casual dominance. "You are free to use anything in this house, but you are not free to leave the property boundary. If you step 1 foot outside this fence, you compromise not only your own safety, but that of Chloe." His rule felt less like protection and more like a precise, gilded imprisonment. He moved toward the door, preparing to leave me alone with my new reality. I stopped him with a sudden, anxious question. "And what about the arrangement? What am I supposed to be doing for you here exactly?" I needed the terms of my captivity to be explicitly clear. My confusion was evident. I was no trophy wife, and I was certainly no business associate. Darian turned back, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, recognizing my need for clarity and control. "You are my consort, Elara," he stated simply, locking eyes with me. "You are the face I want the world to see on my arm, exclusively. And tomorrow, you will find out precisely how that role requires you to perform." I spent the next morning immersed in the chilling reality of Darian Thorne's control. A silent team of stylists, tailors, and manicurists arrived to prepare me, transforming my tired waitress exterior. I was fitted with clothes that cost more than my entire savings, and my simple features were highlighted to a standard of flawless elegance. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the poised, expensive woman staring back. I was now the perfectly crafted accessory Darian had demanded for his dangerous public life. That evening, Darian arrived, his presence filling the suite with his signature gravity and power. He didn't compliment the transformation. He simply assessed it, his dark eyes sweeping over me with critical ownership. "Perfect, Elara," he stated, his approval cold and transactional.
Chloe was already tucked safely into the care of a dedicated live-in nanny, a concession that eased my mother's guilt, but ruthlessly reinforced my necessary captivity. We drove back toward the city, and the tension inside the armored vehicle was palpable. Darian explained the evening's event, a high-stakes private dinner with his most powerful business partners and rivals. "Remember the rules," he murmured, his voice low and close as he checked the diamond clasp on my wrist. "You smile, you listen, and you remain silent unless I address you. You are my beautiful distraction, nothing more, but your performance must be flawless." We entered the elegant venue, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Every eye immediately snapped to Darian, then lingered on me, the new woman on the arm of the city's shadow king. I felt exposed, utterly alien in a world where every gesture was a coded message of power and transaction. I knew this was the real purpose of my transformation, to show the world that Darian Thorne was shifting his focus, perhaps consolidating his power with a shocking new acquisition. We were led toward the main table, but my attention was violently snagged by a man across the room, older, impeccably tailored, but with eyes that were utterly ruthless and calculating. He wasn't merely looking at Darian, he looked directly at me, with an intensity that promised danger far exceeding Marcus's pathetic threats. This man possessed a cold, professional menace that instantly made my blood run cold. "Who is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, struggling to maintain the composure the stylist had built. Darian's grip on my arm tightened sharply, a near painful warning that silenced me. "That, Elara, is Alexei Krov. He is a rival who believes my new stability is a sign of fatal weakness." And in that terrifying moment, I understood my role wasn't just to be a distraction. I was a living, breathing chess piece in a silent, escalating, and bloody war.
Alexei Krov approached our table with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who knew he owned the room. His eyes, cold, hard chips of ice, passed right over Darian to fixate entirely on me, analyzing my designer clothes and controlled expression. "Darian," Krov greeted, his voice a gravelly baritone that barely disguised his contempt, "you acquire many things, but a woman with such fire is new. She seems wasted on this silence." Darian did not flinch, his demeanor remaining effortlessly dominant, yet his grip on my arm tightened further, a clear warning to Krov and me. "She is not wasted, Alexei. She is content," Darian replied, the word a possessive claim that contradicted the anxiety churning in my stomach. "She appreciates loyalty and stability, things that you and your associates often overlook in your pursuit of reckless ambition." Krov smirked, a chilling, humorless expression. "Loyalty is only a cost, Darian, nothing more. And stability is the first step toward stagnation." He leaned closer to the table, his gaze still holding mine. "Tell me, Elara," he used my name like a barb, "does he let you speak for yourself, or are you merely the pretty seal on his new profitable alliances?" The question was a direct challenge to Darian's control and my supposed submission. Before I could process the proper reaction, Darian squeezed my arm, a silent command for my silence, but then surprisingly, he gave me a near imperceptible nod. He wanted me to respond. Suddenly, I understood the game. I wasn't just a shield, I was a weapon. I forced a slow, elegant smile, drawing on the desperate resilience Marcus had never been able to break. "Mr. Krov," I began, my voice clear and steady, using the precise tone I had heard Darian use earlier. "I am here because Darian Thorne offers absolute security. In a world of unstable men, his control is the highest form of respect." I lifted my chin slightly, "and I assure you, my fire is entirely his to command." The lie was flawless, embodying the perfect accessory he needed. Krav stared at me for a long moment, the surprise flickering in his cold eyes giving Darian the win. He finally backed away, offering a dismissive farewell. Darian didn't comment until Krav was gone, then leaned close to my ear. "Well done, Elara, but that smile cost you. Now you owe me more than just time." And I realized his protection was evolving into something far more intimate and terrifying than a business arrangement. We returned to the fortress late that night, the silence in the SUV heavy, charged with the dangerous energy from the confrontation with Alexei Krav. My adrenaline was still surging from the terrifying spotlight, but I felt strangely alive, a feeling I hadn't experienced since before Marcus had stolen my courage. Darian did not speak a word during the drive, his control absolute, his focus solely on the road and the surrounding darkness. The moment the security doors closed behind us, Darian turned, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that burned through my composure. He didn't move toward me, yet his presence was overwhelming. "You were magnificent, Elara," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly acknowledgement that went straight to my core. "You understood the game instantly, and you played him perfectly. That performance cost you, but it saved me a significant investment." "What did it save you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question barely hiding the tremor in my chest. I wanted to understand the value of my action. Darian took one slow, deliberate step closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "It showed Krav that I am not weak," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear, sending a shiver of forbidden excitement down my spine. "And now the payment," he continued, the low command in his voice shattering the fragile calm. His hand rose, his fingers gently brushing the exposed skin of my shoulder, tracing the delicate curve of my collarbone. "You owe me more than loyalty, Elara. You owe me the acknowledgement that your security now belongs entirely to me." His touch was possessive, demanding a response that went beyond mere gratitude. I didn't pull away. I found myself leaning slightly into his touch, realizing that for the first time in years, I didn't have to fight for survival. I only had to submit to a power that promised complete protection. This was the dark bargain. I surrendered my control in exchange for absolute peace for Chloe and me. The choice was terrifying, yet undeniably seductive in its simplicity. Darian finally leaned down, his eyes dark with predatory need, and his lips brushed mine, a quick, searing, and promise-filled contact that stole my breath away. "Get some sleep, Elara," he commanded, his voice rough. "Tomorrow the education begins." But I knew sleep wouldn't come. I was finally realizing that the real danger wasn't outside his walls, but standing right in front of me. The next morning, the promise of the previous night gave way to rigorous instruction. Darian met me in his sprawling home office, a room dominated by technology and hushed tones. The atmosphere was all business, wiping away any trace of the intimate tension we had shared. He didn't want a lover right now. He needed a student who could uphold his reputation in the most unforgiving circles. "Your education starts now, Elara," Darian commanded, pulling up intricate organizational charts on a large screen. "You will learn who matters, who is indebted to me, and who is actively trying to destroy me. Your silence is vital, but your knowledge is your real currency." He pointed to Alexei Krov's name, explaining his history as a threat that needed careful, constant management, not outright war. He spent the next 2 hours detailing the delicate balance of his operations, how the legitimate holdings masked the true engine of his power. I was learning that his world was less about brute force and more about strategic leverage and information control. "Never underestimate the power of discretion," Darian warned, his dark eyes intense. "Those who speak too loudly often die too quickly."
Silence is not weakness, it is survival. During his instruction, Darian received a hushed phone call. His Italian immediately became sharp, his jaw tightening as he listened. Though I didn't understand the words, the shift in his demeanor, the flicker of genuine, unguarded frustration spoke volumes. Something significant had gone wrong within his highly controlled empire, and he was working hard to conceal the disruption from me. When he finally hung up, the air in the room was brittle. "We have a slight complication," he stated, his voice carefully neutral, although the muscle ticking in his cheek betrayed him. "A leak in the South American operation. It is minor, but it requires immediate attention from Silas and me." The minor complication felt like an earthquake in his carefully constructed world. He quickly reassured me that the security of the estate remained absolute, but the anxiety in his eyes was undeniable. He was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and his empire was not the impenetrable monolith I had imagined. And I began to suspect that his need for an accessory was less about status and more about having a loyal sanctuary in the coming storm. Darian and Silas left that afternoon. The silence that followed their departure was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of Chloe playing happily with the new nanny. I watched the black SUV disappear down the private road, a strange mixture of relief and sheer terror washing over me. I was finally free of his intense predatory gaze, yet I was utterly alone in a massive house, guarded only by men I didn't know. The loneliness was profound, highlighting the extreme contrast between my old life and this gilded cage. My old apartment was noisy, messy, and filled with the struggles of motherhood. This fortress was spotless, quiet, and felt increasingly like an extension of Darian's cold, absolute control. I realized the greatest luxury he had given me wasn't the wealth, but the peace of mind knowing Chloe was absolutely safe. Driven by an irresistible, dangerous curiosity, I went back to Darian's office. The large screens were dark, but the air still held the metallic scent of expensive power and recent turmoil. I cautiously approached his desk, knowing I was crossing a forbidden boundary. I wasn't searching for secrets about his business. I was searching for the key to the fear I'd seen flash in his dark eyes when he took that last call. I noticed a thin leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of financial reports. It was not a ledger, but a personal notebook, its pages filled with Darian's sharp handwriting, detailing strategy and risks. I quickly flipped through a few pages, my heart pounding in my chest. Most of it was illegible to me, but one name jumped out, written repeatedly and underlined heavily: Isabella. The sudden appearance of the female name was a shock. Who was Isabella? Was she part of the South American complication? A former partner? A past betrayal? The sheer intensity of Darian's frustration earlier now made sense. This wasn't just a financial leak, but something deeply personal, tied to this mysterious person. I slammed the journal shut, suddenly terrified of being caught by the returning security staff. I replaced the book exactly as I found it. My initial thought was that I was merely an accessory to his power, but the discovery of Isabella confirmed that I had just walked into the middle of Darian's hidden emotional battlefield. Darian returned late the next night, his expression grim, bearing the weight of the minor complication he had faced. He barely acknowledged my presence, heading straight for the hidden safe in his office. My discovery of the name Isabella burned in my mind, forcing me to risk asking the question that jeopardized my carefully maintained silence. I followed him, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. "I know the name Isabella," I declared, watching his shoulders stiffen immediately at the sound of the name. His reaction was visceral, a raw, unguarded pain that shattered the facade of the controlled predator. He turned slowly, his eyes colder and harder than I had ever seen them, making it clear that I had crossed a dangerous and unforgivable line by invading his privacy. She was my sister, Darian finally admitted, the words coming out with immense difficulty. She was the only person in this world I trusted without question, and she was the head of the South American Charitable Foundation, the only truly legitimate part of my entire empire. The revelation was a blow to the gut. The woman I'd thought a rival or lover was the tragic embodiment of his lost honor and innocence. She died 3 years ago, Elara. And the leak you heard about isn't a simple financial matter. Someone is trying to systematically dismantle her foundation, exploiting its assets to undermine my legitimate actions. They're attacking her memory to get to me. The truth was a profound shift in the narrative. Darian wasn't just defending an empire. He was defending the legacy of the only person he'd ever loved unconditionally. His rage was rooted in honor, making the monster I was bonded to suddenly tragic. I finally understood the true value he placed on loyalty and the coldness he used to protect what little decency he had left. Darian stared at me, his intense gaze demanding silence, but I couldn't back down. If they're using her foundation to hurt you, I dared to whisper, then you need help that moves silently in the light. And in that moment, Darian saw not a trophy, but a potential ally, the only person who might be able to help him save his sister's honored name. The shift in Darian's demeanor was immediate and profound. The controlled businessman gave way to a man consumed by the need for justice, and he saw a flicker of possibility in my suggestion. Help that moves quietly in the light? He echoed, his eyes narrowing, assessing me not as an accessory, but as a tool. You spent 6 months being invisible while taking orders. You know how to operate without being seen. Tell me what you mean, Elara. I seized the opportunity, realizing this was my path to genuine value and influence within his walls. Your enemies are expecting a frontal attack from Silas and your security. They are attacking the one thing you can't protect with force, Isabella's reputation. I explained that my experience in service had taught me to read people's subtle cues and motivations, a skill they were neglecting in their world of brute force. I can review the Foundation's public records, the staffing, the donations, I insisted, my voice gaining strength. I understand what honesty looks like. Darian, your people only understand threat and defense. I can find the small human lie they missed. It was a bold declaration of my overlooked skill, a challenge to his reliance on cold efficiency. Darian watched me for a long, silent moment, the conflict obvious on his face. Trust was his weakness, his tragic flaw, but the urgency of his sister's legacy was his undoing. He finally nodded, a barely perceptible gesture that conceded a monumental amount of control. The Foundation's complete digital records are in my server room. They are secured by military-grade encryption. You will not share any discovery with anyone but me, Darian commanded, the seriousness of the rule radiating from him. If you uncover a name, you bring it to me first. Your loyalty to Chloe is your only protection right now. He was placing his trust in my motherhood, acknowledging that my priorities were pure and uncorrupted by his empire. As I walked towards the server room, I felt the weight of his entire legitimate world settle onto my shoulders. I was no longer just the woman he saved from Marcus. I was the unlikely guardian of Isabella's honor. And I knew the key to saving his sister's memory was also the key to freeing myself. I sat in Darian's server room for hours, surrounded by the humming of machines and the silent weight of Isabella's legacy. The files were overwhelming. Years of meticulous financial reports and staffing information, all secured by layers of encryption. My initial panic gave way to a focused determination. This was a paper trail, the kind of mundane work Marcus's chaos had trained me to hate, but now I embraced it as my only path to relevance. I realized Darian's security had focused on the external threat, the powerful rivals. but they hadn't looked at the small internal details. I ignored the millions in assets and focused on the staffing turnover at the South American headquarters. A particular resignation caught my eye. A senior administrative assistant who had left the foundation exactly 2 weeks after Isabella's death, citing personal reasons. The timing was too neat, the resignation too quick for someone who had worked loyally beside Isabella for years. The name was Sophia Cruz. I cross-referenced her information with the financial records, moving with the quiet efficiency Darian had demanded. My heart pounded as I saw a series of small, authorized transfers, not large enough to trigger an alarm, but consistently made to an offshore account in the weeks leading up to her resignation. This was the human lie I had been looking for, not a powerful rival's grand scheme, but a quiet, calculated betrayal by someone trusted. Sophia had used her position to siphon funds discreetly, likely creating the initial leak that now threatened Darian's empire. The realization sent a rush of cold adrenaline through me. I had found the first crack in Darian's seemingly impenetrable wall of power. I quickly compiled the evidence, the resignation date, the offshore account number, and the transfer log, printing a single, discrete report. I left the server room feeling a profound transformation. I was no longer the terrified former waitress, but a dangerous player holding a vital secret. I knew Darian's safety depended on this name, and suddenly, so did mine. I found Darian in the living room, a rare moment of stillness, brooding over a glass of scotch. "I have the name of the traitor," I announced, placing the thin report on the table between us. His dark eyes rose instantly, recognizing that I hadn't just found a name, but had irrevocably changed the power dynamic of our arrangement. Darian didn't touch the report. He only stared at the folder, then raised his eyes to mine, and the raw grief I had seen for Isabella was replaced by a cold, surgical rage. "Sophia Cruz," he repeated, the name tasting like ash on his tongue. Isabella trusted her. She was a fixture in the foundation for 8 years. The betrayal, coming from someone his sister had relied on, was clearly the sharpest cut of all. "The small transfers wouldn't alert your internal security, Darian," I explained, maintaining eye contact, refusing to be intimidated by his anger. "But the timing of her resignation right after Isabella's death is the signature of a calculated betrayal. She set up the leak for a bigger player." I had to make him understand that Sophia was merely the entry point, not the main threat, likely reporting to Alexei Krov. Darian finally took the report, his grip tight enough to crease the paper. "You were right, Elara. They were looking for the grand plan. You found the cheap lie." He leaned back, the control returning to his features, but now his gaze held a deep, new respect. "This changes everything. We don't just stop the leak, we turn it into a trap for the men who hired her. I need you to stay by my side." He moved to his desk, pulling out a hidden satellite phone. The plan he outlined was swift and ruthless. They would use the offshore account number to trace Sophia's recent contacts, spreading false information about the Foundation's assets to draw the true predator into the light. My job was to maintain the illusion of being his unaware accessory, keeping the focus off Darian's sudden new intel. "I need you to be my faith, Elara. I need your courage in public. We will be exposed, but we will be together. Do you understand the risk?" His question wasn't about the danger. It was about the loyalty I was willing to commit to him, now that I was fully informed. I didn't hesitate. I nodded, realizing I was no longer a prisoner, but I was a shield, and a vital one. "I understand, Darian. I will not break." But as I committed my life to his revenge, I saw a profound fear flicker in his eyes, a fear that suggested he knew this confrontation would destroy more than just his rival.
Darian's plan was executed with cold precision. He used the information about Sophia Cruz to feed a rumor through his legitimate business channels, setting a trap designed to draw the true predator out of the shadows. 2 days later, we were at an exclusive, secluded gallery event, the perfect setting for a quiet, public confrontation. My role was simple: remain visually exposed as his distraction, allowing his men to move unseen. My heart pounded beneath the expensive dress, but my years of struggling had forged a steel core. I performed flawlessly, leaning into Darian's possessive touch, my smile fixed and elegant. I saw Alexei Kruff enter, his eyes instantly scanning the room. He walked straight past Darian's associates and approached us, his expression a mixture of triumph and dangerous curiosity. The trap was working. He believed he had us cornered. Darian, Croft sneered, his eyes flicking contemptuously to me. I hear your sister's foundation is proving to be quite the liability. Perhaps you shouldn't mix sentiment with business. This was the moment. Darian's jaw tightened, his face a mask of controlled fury, waiting for my signal. I knew Croft thought he was delivering the final blow, unaware we had the evidence of his spy. I subtly moved my hand, placing it deliberately on Darian's arm, the signal we had rehearsed. Instantly, Silas and two other men moved from the shadows, not towards Croft, but towards two figures standing near the exit, a nervous man and the pale, terrified face of Sophia Cruz. Croft's confident smirk vanished, replaced by sheer, blinding realization that his betrayal had been exposed. Croft turned to Darian, his voice a furious snarl. You cheated. You don't have the stomach for this kind of clean war. Darian simply maintained his grip on me, his eyes never leaving Croft. You attacked my sister's honor, Alexei, he stated, his voice deadly calm. That is not war. That is a personal insult. And the cost of that insult is far more than financial. Croft, utterly defeated, was escorted out by his own security, his power diminished instantly by Darian's public victory. Darian turned to me, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading, replaced by profound relief. But as he looked at me, I realized the victory hadn't ended the transaction. It had only created a new, deeper kind of contract between us. We arrived back at the fortress, the quiet of the night absolute, a stark contrast to the dramatic confrontation we had just survived. The adrenaline finally faded, leaving me exhausted, but strangely triumphant. The 3-month contract was essentially complete. Chloe was safe, Isabella's honor was defended, and Marcus was a forgotten ghost. I knew it was time for me to ask for my freedom. I found Darian in the living room, pouring 2 glasses of expensive wine. He handed me one, his dark eyes searching mine with a look I couldn't interpret. It was no longer possessive, but vulnerable, almost needy. You saved me more than a portion of my empire tonight, Elara. You saved the last piece of Isabella's integrity. For that, I owe you everything. I ask for one thing only, Darian, I said, meeting his gaze directly. My freedom, and the assurance that Chloe and I will never be targets again. I braced myself for the cold negotiation, expecting him to offer me money or a new identity. But Darian simply placed his wineglass down, a slow, decisive gesture that commanded my full attention. He told me the 3-month contract was a lie, a stunning revelation that shattered my fragile sense of victory. He said that the threat from Croft was real, but that he hadn't needed me as an accessory for business reasons, but because he needed someone who could teach him to trust and feel again without the poison of his world. He told me I reminded him of Isabella, that I reminded him of her fire, her stubborn morality. In his face, I saw nothing but the monster persona slipping away. He told me that he only needed the 3-month contract because he didn't think he could survive being close to something pure for longer than that. But now, he knew he could not let me leave. His admission was raw, shocking, and utterly sincere. He didn't move to touch me, giving me the space to process the true motivation behind his actions. He told me that he did not offer me a debt payment, but rather he needed me. He said he needed me and Chloe here. And in that desperate moment, I realized the man who had promised to be my protector had now revealed himself to be the one who truly needed saving.
The confession hung in the air, heavy and fragile, a stark contrast to the bulletproof walls that surrounded us. Darian Thorne, the man who commanded a dangerous empire, stood before me, completely exposed. His need wasn't a demand, it was a desperate plea for connection. He wasn't offering me a safe house. He was offering me the only sanctuary he had, the broken pieces of his own heart, hidden behind layers of cold ambition. I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. Not the predator who took what he wanted, but the boy who watched his father and sister be destroyed by the dishonorable world he now ruled. He had built his golden cage to keep the world out, but he hadn't realized he was trapped inside it himself. His need to protect Isabella's memory, and now Chloe's future, was the only thing that made him human. My initial fear had long been replaced by a complicated mix of respect and profound connection. I knew, with chilling certainty, that leaving meant not just giving up the security of the fortress, but abandoning a soul who had finally dared to reveal his vulnerability. I thought of Marcus's selfish weakness and contrasted it with Darian's fierce, if brutal, strength. He was a monster, but he was my monster. I walked toward him, closing the distance slowly, making my choice deliberate and final. I didn't offer him a passionate embrace. I offered him stability. I reached out and gently placed my hand against his cheek, forcing him to meet my gaze. The 3 months were a transaction, Darian, but a life built on fear is no life at all. I am not leaving. But you are not my shield anymore, I stated, my voice firm with newfound authority. I am your equal. I will stay here not as your accessory, but as your partner. We rebuild this life together on the condition that we build something honest and honorable for Chloe. My decision was not rooted in romance, but in a profound sense of shared purpose and survival. Darian closed his eyes, leaning into my touch, a single deep breath marking his final surrender. He finally opened them, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. He understood the final bargain. His strength would protect our family, and my courage would redeem his soul. And that's how I discovered that the most unbreakable sanctuary isn't found in a powerful man's wealth, but in the vulnerable, shared space where 2 survivors finally choose to fight for each other.